Okay, so here is section 3. So section 3 is deals with the second Red Scare, which is a reaction to the issues with the atomic weapon, specifically the Soviet Union getting the information for them to be able to successfully test an atomic weapon. This happens in August of 1949. United States flying a normal reconnaissance type of flight over the North Pacific, picked up some radioactivity. Once they kind of figured out what it was, they had determined that the Soviet Union had successfully tested an atomic bomb and that the United States no longer held the upper hand in terms of the atomic warfare. So now the United States and the Soviets are on the same level relative to the amount of military capabilities that they might have. Another thing that came out of this was, in terms of the Red Scare anyways, was that communism takes hold in China. There was a series of civil wars fought in China, especially after World War II, between the Nationalist Party, led by Chiang Kai-shek, who was a US-supported nationalist and very much an anti-communist. And then there was the Communist Party, which is supported by Mao Zedong, who was supported by the Soviet Union. And the struggle between those two factions ends up in a civil war that is eventually won by the Communist Party. The nationalist group, led by Chiang Kai-shek, was exiled, I guess, off to the island of Taiwan. And mainland China was referred to as the People's Republic of China. And the US-supported Nationalist Party was isolated to Taiwan, and it remained that way until the early 1970s, when the People's Republic of China was finally recognized by the United Nations in 1972, I think. Skip that video, obviously. At home, that kind of kicks off a huge anti-communist feeling in the United States that had already picked up steam during the 1930s, when a lot of people felt like capitalism during the Depression, that capitalism was failing, and that the way to go was to more of a socialist type of economic and political system. Of course, that died down when World War II opens up, but after World War II ends, that Communist Party started to gain more momentum in the United States, understanding that having a political affiliation to a certain group is not illegal, although the United States government pretty much made it illegal during the 1950s and late 40s. But there was a huge concern that communism was going to make its way into the United States, and that carried on throughout the 1950s, 60s, 70s, even into the 80s, where most of the Cold War that was fought during those 3.5 decades was fought over trying to prevent communism from spreading outside of the Soviet Union. And that's a huge undertaking. Now, there was some failures along those lines. We've already talked about the fact that China had already, converted over to communist. We'll find that happens in Vietnam in the 1970s. And it also happens in Cuba in the late 1950s. But the United States also had some successes as well, preventing communism from spreading into parts of Western Europe and other parts of South Korea as well. But here at home, there was a huge concern over communists having infiltrated some areas of our society, specifically in Hollywood. Hollywood had access to, a lot of different ways of convincing and influencing people through their actors, through their writings, through their films. And so the Congress and the anti-communist groups throughout the United States were very much concerned that Hollywood was a hotbed for spreading, coded messages or spreading communist theories throughout the world, throughout the United States. And as a matter of fact, there were actually several actors, producers, and writers who were brought to Congress to testify, whether they were communist or not. And 10 of them refused to answer the questions. They were just, exercising their right to remain silent, right? Their Fifth Amendment, they plead the Fifth. And those individuals were held in contempt. Many of them served time in jail. And a lot of those individuals, once, they served their time, whatever it might have been, when they returned to Hollywood, whatever it's 3 years, 10 years later, whatever it might have been, they couldn't find jobs. They were blacklisted. And so it really had an effect on, that part of society. There's also a big push to identify those who may be communist, and they went through and investigated people who may be involved in communist theories. Maybe they subscribed to magazines, or they checked out books out of the library that might have some communist theory throughout, woven into the book or something to that extent. When they went through that investigation, it was several thousand were forced to resign. A couple hundred were found to be disloyal and fired from their job as federal employees because of their connection to being part of the Communist Party, whether that was true or not. So a huge, paranoia going on throughout the United States relative to identifying communists within society and within the government specifically. So the laws are passed. Congress passes several acts that identified people who were maybe part or believed in communist theory. The Smith Act was one. There was a Supreme Court case that went down, which gave the Supreme Court authority to identify something that might have grave and probable danger. And that if Congress or the Supreme Court ruled that it was grave and probable danger, it was okay to limit someone's free speech, justify their limits on free speech, things of that sort. So again, really a time where everybody was paranoid, within the government about, everyone's a communist type of thing. Other acts, the McCarran Act was passed, required communists to register. Just like you would have to register as a Republican or a Democrat. There was private investigative boards that were created, and their main job was to investigate and identify people who were believed to be communist. Truman originally vetoed this bill when it went in front of his desk, but Congress overrode his veto by a 2/3 vote. So even though Truman didn't want it to become law, Congress, that's none of that checks and balance thing, right? So Congress overrode the veto and it now became law. Other examples, spy cases, people who were convicted of spying. Alger Hiss was one, was convicted of spying for the Communist Party. Klaus Fuchs was a German-born scientist who actually worked on the Manhattan Project. He was convicted of giving the Soviets detailed drawings of parts of the Manhattan Project or the plans on how the atomic weapons were created. The Rosenbergs were also charged and convicted and actually executed of spying for the Soviets relative to, again, atomic secrets that they had apparently or allegedly given to the Soviets. So a lot of examples of those, kind of overreaction, paranoid individuals within the government trying to, prevent information getting to the Soviets. And that was a thing throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s, even into the 80s. And probably the most significant part of this, of course, these videos aren't going to come through. I'm just going to pause these. Was the Senator Joe McCarthy, who was a relatively unknown senator from Wisconsin, who really wasn't that much of a convincing or powerful senator by any means. But he went to a random meeting. It was like some kind of a meeting of women business owners or something, and held up a piece of paper and said that on this paper, I have 205 known communists who work for the federal government in the State Department. And that was a huge, huge controversy. It got a lot of press after the fact, where people were saying, wait a minute, who is this guy? And what does he say he has? When it was all played out, it was found that he didn't have 205 convicted communists. And he didn't have any proof of any of those individuals being part of the Communist Party. He was just looking for some notoriety, trying to, give himself a name, as a senator, trying to, make his way up the political ladder, so to speak. But it was found out that it was all his own imagination, his own fabrications of information, the overblown and over-exaggerated stuff. And he was eventually caught. I don't know if caught would be the word, but the truth came out, so to speak. He never produced a list. Congress never found any evidence after they investigated. But, it's like when, it's a horrible analogy, but if you accuse an adult of something like, making sexually inappropriate comments towards a student, right? And you just say you say I have evidence or whatever, and word gets out that hey, Mr. So and so, made an inappropriate comment to a girl or whatever. Even though it was never proven, there was no evidence. The word gets out, the damage is already done. Like that, whoever Mr. So-and-so is will probably never find a job in public schools again, because even though it was, it was always that lingering, well, maybe, but there was no evidence, but the old saying, where there's smoke, there's fire type of thing, even though the person may have made it all up. Well, that's what happened here, is that even though McCarthy never produced a list, there was never any evidence. The individuals who were on that supposed list found it very difficult to find work again in the federal government. And so, the damage had already been done type of thing. Eventually, Dwight Eisenhower, who at that time is now president of the United States, goes after McCarthy, and eventually is convicted of condemnation, which is basically lying to Congress. And he is impeached or recalled from his position as a senator by a vote of 67 to 22. Of course, that equals 87. So there was, or I'm sorry, 89. So there was several senators who apparently did not vote, but a great majority, right? There's 100 senators, and 89 voted. So that's a pretty high percentage. And he was never a politician again. As a matter of fact, 3 years after he was removed from Congress, he died of alcoholism. So obviously, he's an individual who had some issues far beyond communism. All right, so that covers section 3. You should not, we won't get till section 4 until I get back on Thursday. So you have section 2 and section 3 and video lectures. And again, remembering that you have those assignments posted. You have the guided questions that were due Monday night. You have the You have the lead-in, I believe, on section 3, maybe. You have the DBQ on section 4, which is on the Korean War. So there's an assortment of assignments that you could be working on here over the next couple of days, in addition to getting these lecture outlines done. So I appreciate you guys. Apologize for the inconvenience, but you can hear my voice. I'm probably wouldn't be much of a help to you guys at school. And the last thing I want to do is get some of you guys sick. So I'm on meds now. And hopefully, like I say, by Wednesday, sometimes things will clear up and I'll be in a better situation to return to school on Thursday.